perspective on infrastructure. Earlier, I had a chance to meet with Mexico's current chair of the governors, the CONAGO. The current chair is Francisco Dominguez, and the incoming chair, Governor Carlos Mendoza. And so we've got both representatives from Mexico and Canada. Up here on the stage, we're really thrilled to have with us a total of 5 premiers from our neighbors to the north. We very much appreciate everybody making the tremendous effort to come down here and join us. They're going to be joining us for this discussion on infrastructure from an international perspective. I believe that Canada is doing some really interesting and creative things on infrastructure, so we want to thank each one of you for joining us. We have Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, who is the chair of the Council of the Federation, which is our equivalent, is sort of like the NGA of Canada. Quebec Premier François Legault, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs, and Alberta Premier Jason Kenney. Please give them a big NGA welcome. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for joining us. Thank you very much. So we have a great partnership between the COF and the NGA, and I thank you very much for being here with us. I'd like to just start the discussion by asking each of you what your priorities are as it relates to infrastructure and what our states can learn from the approaches and the investments. And I'll start with you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, Larry, and thank you to all of the governors here, and thank you for the relationship that we have had over the course of the last year between the NGA and the Council of Federation, or COF, in Canada. It's appreciated, and I look forward to it as we move along. We've done all of the different types of infrastructure in Canada, P3s. We've done the public investment, obviously, and really worked with our private sector to ensure that there's maximum opportunity for that private investment across what is a very integrated economy, whether it's across the U.S., across Canada, or I would say even more so across North America, and what we can do to enhance the opportunity for that stronger continental economy, if you will. And before you invest in infrastructure, you need to have the trade agreements. And I would like to take the opportunity for not only the leadership on the negotiation for our USMCA, the modernization of NAFTA that was in many ways led by the United States of America, to thank you for that. Thank you for the ratification. And from Canada's perspective, all 13 premiers have put forward bipartisan support for that agreement to be ratified, and ratified very quickly without delay in our federal parliament. And I think you will see as the weeks go by that you will have that bipartisan support at our federal level. And I think it is one more step for us to building that continental infrastructure that we need to ensure that we have a stronger economy, not just in our respective nations, but across North America. And so I do want to take the opportunity on behalf of all of the premiers to say thank you to each and every one of you in this room and the U.S. administration for the trade agreement that we now have.
And not to interrupt, but we want to thank you, because our two organizations and the governors and the premiers working together to try to make this happen, and we want to thank you for your leadership as well. Yeah. So we're just going to go down the line and let each of you go ahead and tell us what...
My name is François Legault. I'm the Premier of Quebec, so Quebec includes Montreal. As you can hear, we speak French in Quebec. I'm a new Premier. I was an entrepreneur, and I started a new party. And last year, we won a majority government for the next 4 years. So now I have to deliver the goods. And maybe 2 subjects rapidly that I would like to chat with you. First, transportation. Large cities in North America will invest a lot in trains, streetcars, subways in the next few years. And there are 4 major companies in the world. You have a company in China called CRRC. You have a company in Germany called Siemens. You have a company in France called Alstom. And you have a company in Quebec called Bombardier. There's no U.S. company making those products. So I think there's a great opportunity to work together to build a champion of these products in North America. But right now, we have a challenge with Buy America and Buy American. The requirement of 70% doesn't permit us to integrate our companies together. Second subject, very rapidly, hydroelectricity. Quebec has very large surpluses of hydroelectricity. We already have agreements with Vermont, with Massachusetts, with New York, and we're in negotiation with Mr. de Blasio at the City of New York to export more hydroelectricity, cheap and clean energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Premier Ford.
Well, first of all, thank you, Governor Hogan, for inviting us down here, and I know on April 21st, April 23rd.
Yeah, make the plug.
I got to make the plug here.
Thank you.
Yes,
we invite all the governors up to Toronto. It's one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and I invite the folks listening to us to come up as well. I just want to mention to all our governors.
The next summit of our infrastructure tour.
That's right.
You're going to be hosting us.
And we have some of the experts. We are experts when it comes to P3s, public-private partnerships. We do over $300 billion a year, Ontario alone, with the United States. If we were a standalone country, we'd be the third largest trading partner to the U.S. We're the #1 customer to 19 states. We're #2 to 9 other states. And we'd love to have you come up, sit down and talk about public-private partnerships. Our government is investing $144 billion. I'm going to repeat that, $144 billion into infrastructure. I think that's one of the highest in North America. We're focusing right now on 32 projects with P3s totaling $64 billion. Areas like transit, we're building one of the largest subway systems in North America to add on to our great subway system of $28.5 billion. I'd like to invite you, your family, and friends to come up April 21st, 23rd. Maybe we'll even get you to one of those Raptor Championship team that we have up in Toronto. And that's probably, I think, is going to be the playoff time. So we look forward to winning the championship one more time. So thank you, everyone.
If you make the playoff.
Premier,
We'll make the playoffs.
Premier Higgs.
Thank you, Governor Hogan. So I'm Premier of New Brunswick, and we have the largest refinery in Canada, and it would supply refined product to 80% of the market, Boston and North. And through that, in the forestry sector, 40% of the imports of pulpwood goes into Maine and feeds mills and sawmills. We have 17 border crossings between ourselves and the state of Maine. So we're very integrated. When we talk about an integrated economy, we're not only integrated in economic terms, but we're integrated in family terms. And as I said this morning, you know, the borders have become not, at one time they were kind of an inconvenience. My dad was a border guard for 25 years, but now they've become a barrier. And it's a movement that we have back and forth. And I feel like we're not trading, you know, we're not trading opponents, we're trading partners. And we've always been kind of joined at the hip in that regard. In talking about the infrastructure that we watched here in this video, what I find the partisan politics, very much the priorities don't get set on the needed projects. We don't have flexibility coming from, let's say, the federal counterparts in order to focus on the needs of a particular province. And we end up building things we don't need. And we do it so we can cut a ribbon and take a photograph. And that's why our infrastructure is in the state it's in, because we haven't been able to focus on an asset management program, we haven't been able to focus on what's needed and do it in a priority, and certainly we haven't been able to keep it to go from one election, from one government to the next. Now I'm in a minority government with a third party kind of working together. So it's hard to say whether I'll be here next year or not. But in any case, we're going to focus on getting results on the things that are needed. And I think that's what that video was saying.
Yeah, thank you. Premier Kenney.
Jason Kenney from Alberta, the Rocky Mountain province in the west, and we are the single largest supplier of energy to the United States. 40% of your energy imports come from my province, with the world's third largest accessible oil reserves and also huge natural gas reserves, which is a huge, I think, advantage to American and continental energy security and independence. With that energy wealth comes the need for enormous infrastructure. And increasingly, we are seeking to build green infrastructure as we move into the period of energy transition. We want to learn from a lot of the states, Governor, that have been very forward-leaning on P3s and in innovative ways of paying for the infrastructure that the taxpayers cannot afford directly. I'll give you a couple of examples. We've been major investors as a government in carbon capture, utilization, and storage technology, which we think is becoming increasingly commercially viable. And we're running a carbon trunk line from some of our refineries that are capturing carbon, and it will be injecting it into our sedimentary conventional oil basin to allow for enhanced oil recovery with a net negative carbon score. So that's a sort of P3 project, and we see a lot of opportunity for that in the future. Second and point is that Alberta-based companies want to invest billions of dollars in modernizing and expanding energy infrastructure in your states. For example, Enbridge, the largest pipeline company in North America based in Alberta, is seeking to spend $600 million to modernize the Line 5 project that's 60 years old under the Straits of Mackinac, to make it safe, buried it under the lake bed, to be a reliable supplier of energy to the upper Midwest for years to come. Just met with Governor of Minnesota about their effort as well to replace a 60-year-old pipe through Minnesota to Wisconsin through Line 3 to create modern and safe technology, a lot safer than moving energy by train. And finally, the Keystone XL project, where TC Energy is prepared to spend billions of dollars, as you know, through 4 U.S. states to expand and modernize energy infrastructure. So we are committed to being really a global leader in green tech in the non-renewable resource sector, also moving towards renewables, but continuing to be the largest supplier of energy to the United States, hopefully through this modern infrastructure.
Thank you very much. So we touched on this a little bit, but the cross-border infrastructure is so vital between our two countries, between our states and provinces. How can your provinces and our states work together to improve cross-border infrastructure? I'll start with you, Chairman Mo.
Well, I would say we keep discussing on the state to province level as well as at our federal administrations. Listen, the benefits are just too large to walk away from. And for instance, you can start with air, of course, but road and rail infrastructure, of which we desperately need going across the border, and our border ports, of which we've had some discussions on over the course of the late last year with Governor Bullock and others. But we need the road and rail infrastructure so we can bring in those big red tractors and those green combines from Illinois, so that we can grow our oats and our canola and send that back down to be refined into canola oil and oats, and then create jobs in Iowa and other places in the U.S. so that we can ship this agri-food product then around the world. And you can see how it's beneficial for not only us in Canada, but for the agri-food processing sector in the U.S. Well, the same holds true, and we would be likely the second largest energy producer in the nation, barring possibly Newfoundland. We're back and forth a little bit, but the energy infrastructure that crosses our borders, and we're doing some within the nation as well. We're just approved for the TMX pipeline going out to the west coast of Canada. But the Keystone XL pipeline, for example, I think we need to remember that same narrative of adding value to a North American energy product down in the Gulf Coast, and then shipping that not only to North Americans to utilize, but around the world. And we need to remember what that product is. It is one of the most sustainable products available compared to products that are coming from other areas around the world. For example, Premier Kenney, pardon me, had mentioned that they're using carbon capture and storage. We're using carbon capture and storage off a coal-fired power plant as well, taking that carbon, adding it to carbon that's coming out of the gasification plants in North Dakota, and putting that into enhanced oil recovery, bumping up our harvest, driving down our carbon per barrel of oil. We have a methane action plan with our thermal plants up in the Lloydminster area that are driving our methane emissions down 40 to 45%. That's the energy that's going in that pipe, alongside other energy that is picked up in Montana and North Dakota along the way, and putting people to work with good careers down in the Gulf Coast, putting people in Texas and Louisiana to work in providing those jobs and providing the world with comparatively much more sustainable products. So the benefit of us working together with these cross-border efforts is truly beneficial. And I would summarize it with this. The the benefit of us and our Canadian Football League of importing American college football players has greatly enhanced the caliber of football in our football league. And I would also say that the benefit of Canadian exports of hockey players to the U.S. has greatly enhanced the opportunity for the National Hockey League and the Capitals. One not that long ago, and 3 Saskatchewan boys on the St. Louis Blues this last year. And the benefits are huge, and we should always be striving towards those benefits for our economy and, of course, our professional sports organizations.
That's pretty good. Premier Legault.
Yeah. I think when we talk about infrastructure in 2020, we also need to talk about environment. How can we reduce the greenhouse gases in North America? Do our share to save the planet. And I'm very proud to say that if you take the 60 states and provinces in North America, Quebec is first. We have the lowest greenhouse gas per capita in Quebec. The reason for that is hydroelectricity. We have surpluses that we're trying to export. But even if we have the lowest greenhouse gas per capita, we want to do more. So that's why if one of the governors has some projects about electric cars, about electric trucks, about electric buses. And like I said, if somebody is interested to have a partnership with a company making trains, subways, and streetcars, I would like to talk to your people and see what we can do together, because we really need to reduce those greenhouse gases. And I think that the young people are asking for that, and we have a responsibility.
Thank you, Premier Ford.
Oh, thank you, Premier Legault, for leading into. We also produce trains, planes, automobiles in Ontario and Bombardier, and we're number 2 to Michigan. We're just slowly, just slightly behind, I should say. Michigan, we produce over 2 million automobiles a year. We have the big 5 up there. But going back to the infrastructure, we're looking at bilateral agreements with states, so we can work from province to state. Governor DeWine, I know our group, we're working together to put a great program together to make things easier for the infrastructure folks from Ohio to come up and invest in $144 billion. That's one of the largest infrastructure projects in North America that you can get involved in. We have a great organization in Toronto, and part of the Ontario government called Infrastructure Ontario. They're experts. We're one of the best in the world. I'll give a plug to our friends in Australia. They're good. We've been doing it for years. We outsource that technology. So if you come up April 21st to April 23rd, we'll set you up with the experts in Infrastructure Ontario and show you folks how we can do public-private partnerships. But come up, take advantage of the $144 billion that we have there, the $28.5 billion subway project that we're doing, and a wide range of other infrastructure projects. Ontario is an economic powerhouse in North America.
He's quite the salesman. Premier Higgs.
You know, thinking about the integration between our borders, I think of a project up in northwestern New Brunswick, in Evanston, Madawaska, so up northern Maine is. And we're building, there's a new bridge infrastructure plan there to connect. And the interesting thing about that area, and when I talk about the integration of our trade and our activities, we have a pulp mill on the New Brunswick side of the border that feeds a paper mill on the Maine side of the border. So the two are linked. We brings us to the softwood lumber agreement and the 20% tariffs that are currently on our producers, or at least 50% of our producers. And if you look at the whole supply chain between Maine and New Brunswick, we have a very integrated flow of chips, of pulpwood, of tops, of going back and forth that feed the industries on either side of the border. So the infrastructure that we have have that moves our materials around is unique, I think, in terms of the integration, but it's strategic in order for us to maintain that business atmosphere and that business to be viable.
Speaking of Maine, by the way, Governor Mills, I don't know if she's here, but we will be having our summer meeting in Maine, and we're looking forward to Toronto, but we also invite you to cross over the border right from where you are to come to visit us. A lot of the governors will be at the summer meeting in Maine, so it won't be that far to go. So
to that point, I think of Campobello Island, where President Roosevelt's summer home was. Yeah. We can't even get to that without going through Maine. So we talk about access and such, and I suppose you've probably been to Campobello.
There you go. Okay, well, Premier Kenney.
Well, I think your question was about cross-border infrastructure. I'd just make one point to echo what we heard from the private sector panel, which is how critically important regulatory certainty is in moving forward, because
you have the same kinds of issues.
Exactly, and I mean, Doug can talk to this in Ontario, but I know I was in the federal government when we announced the new Detroit-Windsor border crossing bridge, the Gordie Howe Bridge. Oh, yeah. I think in 2010 or 2011. It's a decade ago. Yep. And as you know, that became a huge political fight and years and years and years of delay. The opportunity costs, the infrastructure costs go up. The only people that make money on these deals are the lobbyists and the lawyers. And we have the same thing going on with the Keystone XL pipeline, which has now, there was a 7-year process leading to a veto, and then 2 presidential permits and endless litigation. Finally, it appears to be ready to proceed. But this, investors are not prepared to wait endlessly to risk their shareholders' money in these kinds of projects, and neither should we as political leaders. When approvals are given, especially on cross-border infrastructure, we have to seize the day and move forward.
Very good, thank you. We're going to open up, see if there are any questions from our governors. Anybody?
Governor Hogan, I'll take one.
I don't see where that's coming from, but jump right in.
Thank you. I'm curious for the premiers, as you are developing and implementing infrastructure projects, I'm curious what your process is in terms of consultation with your First Nations and your partnerships with your First Nations as you're developing these projects.
Well, I can speak to that quickly, and I know Premier Kenney will have some words as well, as he has developed some very positive relations and processes with the Indigenous communities in Alberta. We have, I'll use our forestry sector as an example. In the northern areas where I live of Saskatchewan, it's actually central Saskatchewan, but everyone refers to it as the northern areas, where we have really integrated the Indigenous communities and people into the forestry sector. We have about a 35% employment rate in the forestry sector. They own businesses that are operating in that sector now, and it's been a successful partnership. It compares across the nation to about a 4% saturation of Indigenous employment in that particular sector. So it's been successful. It's been successful for communities to be integrated not only in the employment area, but also to be owning businesses and operating businesses that are working in there, and really to be part of the sector, if you will. And so that integration, it didn't come easily and it didn't come quickly. It came through long conversations and sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, but it was most certainly worth it. We have a similar story to tell when it comes to the integration in our uranium mining industry in the northern areas of Saskatchewan as well, another clean fuel source, where they were running about 46%, I believe, was northern and Aboriginal employment in that industry, with the companies, again, that had worked very hard to achieve those numbers. It's been successful. But there's more work to do, and I think Premier Kenney can speak about some of the current work in Alberta.
In Canada, there's a constitutional principle that has developed through recent jurisprudence in the last couple of decades, that the Crown, the state, has an obligation to consult with Indigenous people on any infrastructure in their traditional territories. And we're finally starting to get clarity about what that means. It has created some investor uncertainty. And at the same time, it has helped to bend the curve where the private sector is now much more willing to be proactive, to engage, to approach First Nations communities with benefit agreements. And now one of the challenges we find, though, is that many of the First Nations want to be partners in prosperity, want to move their people, often in remote areas, from poverty to opportunity through infrastructure jobs, construction jobs. but they don't have the financial depth to do so. And in many cases, they don't have the financial expertise or experience. So that my government has recently created a new Crown Corporation, a state enterprise, called the Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, backstopped by $1 billion of our credit, to support Aboriginal co-ownership or financial participation in major resource projects. And there's great excitement about this. I brought together all 48 of our Indigenous chiefs shortly after being elected, and there was virtual unanimity about being partners in that kind of an approach.
Great, thank you. Governor Herbert.
Well, thank you. We're honored to have you all here as premiers, and welcome. We've had you many times before, and we hope you keep coming back. Premier Moe talked about the great athletes in Canada, and I'm proud to be the father-in-law of one of the greatest wide receivers in CFL history, Ben Cahoon.
Yes, sir.
Played for the Alouettes.
That's right.
And
You are correct. He was one of the greatest.
in the Hall of Fame, retired
Absolutely.
in Jersey, in fact. So we have fond memories of those days, and we appreciate our friends to the north. My question for you is this. You mentioned, Premier Kenney, about the delays that occur. It seems that we have not only the political fights here in the States, but sometimes those go into the legal courts, and litigation after litigation after litigation, long, many-year delay. What are you doing in Canada that maybe we can learn from? It seems that you don't have as much litigation there as we have down here.
Don't be so sure about that.
We're in the courts.
How long, because I've heard, at least in Calgary and the energy things there, that once you've made a decision, we have a NEPA process that seems to never end. Once there's been a decision made, then don't we come to an end where there's no more litigation, no more lawsuits?
I think we all wish that were true, but I don't think it's been our experience. And part of that is because of the recent jurisprudence over the obligation to consult Indigenous people on their traditional territories, because quite frankly, not even the courts were entirely clear what that meant. But we had a very important legal decision earlier this week, it was on Tuesday, where the Federal Appeals Court said, as long as there's a good faith effort to consult with Indigenous people, once a decision has been made as being in the public interest, you must proceed. I'll give you one example. We've got this Trans Mountain pipeline going to the West Coast. 129 First Nations were consulted. 120, according to the court, were in favor or not opposed. Only 5 were opposed. And the court has finally said the 5 do not get to stop progress for the other 120. So there is now legal clarity for the first time in a long time in Canada, at least on that dimension of law.
And I think in fairness to that, this process has provided that example of how we all need to do better on consultation and integrating, all along the route into the opportunity for ownership and participation. And in these resource projects, I spoke to the forestry industry. They truly do want to participate in some meaningful way, and they're long and drawn-out conversations from time to time that do end up in the court from time to time, but we are doing better, I think, as we take steps forward in the nation.
And I'd like to, comment in relation to the beginning process. And part of the consultation process has been trying to define what that consultation process really is, and what parameters have to be covered. A previous government for us, tried to expand an LNG operation because we are a natural gas operation, which we have significant resources. But it wasn't successful, and we're taking a new approach here to work with the First Nations to help move it, because what we're learning, I think, and it's time to learn this, is that we need their help. We need their help to move big projects forward and avoid some of this litigation and these efforts, because it's a new day, and I think we've seen it right in our own province to expand on that natural resource and to move in an LNG export way for the future. So we learn along the way, and the sad part, sometimes we don't. The lessons learned aren't let's say, taken and moved forward. They just are repeated.
Governor Burgum.
Thank you. I just want to say thanks to all the premiers that are here today. As a state that has a 330-mile-long border with Canada, I especially want to say hello to our neighbor to the north, Premier Moe, and I know along with him and Premier Palliser from Manitoba, we've really been operating as neighbors, because as a number of the premiers have said, this isn't just about the built environment that connects us, it's also families. We've got people that grow up in North Dakota that the nearest hospital is across the border, and that's where they're born. We've got people that are farming on both sides of the border that might be hauling their grain to the nearest grain elevators on the other side of the border, and this has been going on for hundreds of years. In addition to the built environment, we've also got rivers. We got two, the Souris River and the Red River of the North, both which one starts in Canada, comes down in North Dakota, goes back to Canada. The other one that forms the border of North Dakota and Minnesota goes north. We have over $3 billion of flood protection projects going on those two rivers in North Dakota, but again, the ability for us to have basin-wide collaboration on those projects has been fantastic, because we might be two countries, but we're in one. The water doesn't know which country it's in, and we've got to work together across those things. And so the other last thank you I want to say is, and people may not know, of course, this is one of the longest borders in the world that has for centuries been between two countries where neither has invaded each other. I guess with the exclusion of the football players and the hockey players going back and forth, there's been no invasion. But we have, in North Dakota, dedicated along with Manitoba and the country Canada, there's International Peace Guard, and the garden actually spans the border. So you can enter the garden, and it's an extensive multi-mile long place, and you can pass and forth freely between the two countries. It's a unique thing in the world. And this last year, our legislature dedicated $5 million for infrastructure improvements in there, with the idea that would be a match from Canada, and we're understand it's moving forward with the legislatures, but we hope to have that happen. And we've talked about the First Nations and the Indigenous people. When it was created in the 1930s, there was a beautiful peace chapel built on the border celebrating this amazing relationship between our two countries, but it had quotes from 60 leaders around the world around peace. But none of the Native nations were represented in that. And so we're also going through the process of reestablishing through flag ceremonies and quotes to get the Native nations included in that. So we appreciate on a number of fronts the great partnership with our neighbors to the north. And the last thing I'd say, we have a booming economy in North Dakota. We have 30,000 jobs open. All my governors around the table say, well, we don't have to worry about any of our people ever moving all the way up north to North Dakota to go to work. And so I've told Premier Palliser and the mayor of Manitoba, or mayor of Winnipeg, that we're only looking for 30,000 people to move south to North Dakota to fill all those jobs. So we've got our solution to our workforce all figured out. But thank you.
Just a comment.
I just have to correct the governor on one point, small point of history. There was an invasion. In fact, there were 3 invasions of the Irish Fenians from New York State that you guys got loaded up and they sent up north in 1867, but that only lasted about 48 hours. So.
and Governor, you're exactly right. The integration of families across the border, in particular in a close, where we have a shared border between North Dakota and Saskatchewan, is closer than even we may know, as there may be one individual on this stage that has a daughter that is, for the last 4 years, has been attending MSU in Minot, North Dakota, and is now looking very much at the UND in Grand Forks, and she's, I think, eyeing up one of those 30,000 jobs down there maybe at the end of the day, and I'm hoping she comes back to see her father every now and again. I guess I let the big cat out of the bag on who that is, but you're right with respect to water infrastructure, and some of that's direct public investment for the most part that has been occurring north and south of the border for decades now on that particular river system that impacts Saskatchewan, North Dakota, as well as Manitoba, and we have a significant sized dam just north of the border where we have a joint operating agreement on that dam, so that we are always talking with respect to when the gates are open, how they are opening, and that investment is happening north of the border, doing its best to protect people south of the border, and then coming back as the water flows back into Manitoba. And I know there's been tremendous amounts of infrastructure more recently invested in North Dakota on that very same river system, and it's really a joint investment coming at it from both sides of that 49th parallel that is for the benefit of so many.
And first of all, Governor, you're 100% correct. We have the largest unprotected border in the entire world. There's no two countries that are more intertwined like this than Canada and the United States. And I know I can speak for all of us. We're so grateful to have the greatest neighbor in the entire world, the United States. One thing, Governor, we need 250,000 people up in Ontario to fill the jobs. So after you get your 30,000, send the 250,000 up to Ontario. But
if they came from North Dakota to Ontario, they'd be going down, not up.
Yeah, I'm in all the states. Bring them up. I love them.
We have maybe time for one last question, if anybody has one. Let me just quickly, we're just about out of time, but we talked about the USMCA. Anybody want to just weigh in on what this might mean, or just touch on kind of where you are in the process, how long it's going to take to get it done, what it's going to mean for you and for us?
On the process, several of us met with Representative Lighthizer yesterday and with our Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, and we committed to do everything we can to accelerate this through Parliament. It is just been sent to committee. There was a federal election, so we were a little bit behind the curve in terms of getting this done. Yeah. But all 13 premiers, as the Premier Mose mentioned, we've committed to try to get this accelerated, and I hope within a matter of days.
Wonderful.
That's my hope, anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I say, 13 premiers from all different political stripes are firmly behind this agreement, representing every square inch of Canada and representing collectively every single Canadian. So this is an important agreement that all Canadians are behind, and we look forward to having at least an initiative in the next number of days, and then it will flow through our parliamentary process, which does take a little bit of time, but ultimately, you know, it is going to be ratified here in short order.
Oh, that's fantastic. So we're going to take about a 15-minute break before our keynote address by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Please join me in giving a big NGA thank you to our premiers for joining us for this panel.
That was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.